Bradley, the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And we are so fortunate that we're members, that U.S. Chamber has done a wonderful job helping us. So thanks again, Neil, and we'll introduce you more in just a moment. But first, we have a very special surprise. We are honored today to have our webinar kicked off by a special guest who, along with his colleagues in Congress last week, in a huge show of bipartisanship and support for small businesses, passed the legislation that Neil will be discussing in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to welcome U.S. Senator John Coryn. Thank you for being here, Senator.
Well, thank you, Eddie, and thanks to the Lubbock Chamber for organizing this call so we can provide businesses in the Lubbock community with information about the new resources that are available to them in response to the coronavirus. Thanks to Neil for being here and joining the call to walk through some of the details. And as I'm beginning to hear from some of my friends in Texas in the banking community and credit unions, already there are questions that have arisen as a result of some of the initial regulations being issued by Treasury with regard to some of the lending through SBA certified lenders. But we'll work through all that together. We know this virus has spread across 50 states with remarkable speed and has had a big impact both on our physical health and our economic well-being too. Congress has passed 3 pieces of legislation so far to help bolster the resources available for healthcare providers and support workers and businesses that have been impacted by the economic fallout. So let me quickly go through some of the provisions of this CARES Act. It's a $2 trillion piece of legislation. If you'd ever told me before I would vote for a $2 trillion piece of legislation, I would not have believed you. But I did. And 96 senators unanimously voted for it because this is a national emergency. Well, it gets to the heart of the crisis and provides a lot of resources. First of all, it sends $100 billion to hospitals that are being crushed by the weight of this workload and the fact they've had to defer elective surgery in most instances. And this provides additional support for public health agencies and greater access to telemedicine. We know telemedicine offers a lot of promise, and Texas Tech, I know, is one of the leaders in telemedicine. And one of the main concerns that Governor Abbott shared with me initially when we talked about this was the shortage of testing equipment and the shortage of personal protective equipment, both for healthcare workers and for first responders. This legislation includes $16 billion to increase the access to these resources. And we've done our very best to cut red tape everywhere we can, although that may seem like an oxymoron that the federal government is capable of cutting red tape, but we've tried. And we want to make sure that the vaccines and the treatments that are already currently being tested in clinical trials, if they are approved, get to patients and get to doctors in the hardest hit areas as fast as possible. Of course, we all know we've had to change our behavior. We've had to engage in social distancing, which I know is less of a problem out in West Texas than it is in places like Dallas and Houston, but we've all had to learn good personal hygiene again, the things our mother taught us growing up: wash your hands, maintain safe distances, and don't help transmit this virus. But we also know this has had a dramatic impact on every family. Schools are closed, travel plans have been canceled, people are losing their jobs and their paychecks, and everyone's hunkering down and wondering when it will end. Well, our goal here, as I said, was to provide some hope and some stability to both our public health system as well as our economy. First, we knew that there are a lot of people who were simply not getting a paycheck as a result of the business they work for closing down, if you're in the hospitality business, for example. And so initially, this gets direct financial aid to Texans who need it most. A family of 4, up to $3,400 for a family making $150,000. That will provide an immediate infusion of cash. The Treasury says they will get that within 2 or 3 weeks. of the time the president signed the bill, which was last Friday. This also expands unemployment insurance. It extends the eligibility period and provides an extra $600 a week for federal benefits on top of the state's portion. And that will be good through the end of this calendar year. We need to make sure that people have the money they need, not only to pay for their food, but to cover their rent and other expenses until the smoke clears. Well, when the smoke does clear, we want to make sure that the jobs that currently exist continue to exist, and to the extent humanly possible. And that's going to be a huge challenge for businesses, small and large. As I said, many of businesses have closed their doors because of no fault of your own, or you've dramatically shifted operations. For most small businesses, it's not feasible to go weeks, let it go months without reliable income. And I know tomorrow is the first of the month, which means rent due for many businesses. This legislation provides a $350 billion paycheck protection program through SBA certified lenders, which provides 8 weeks of cash flow assistance for small businesses. These are low interest loans that can be used to cover everything from payroll costs to supply chain disruptions and rent. And if employers choose to maintain their payroll until June, payroll, rent, and utility payments covered by this loan program can be completely forgiven. The loan amount can be up to 250% of your average payroll with a maximum of $10 million. As I said, these are through SBA certified lenders. It's not through the usual SBA process. This will be distributed through local banks and credit unions. The goal is to get the money to them and out to the people who need it as fast as possible. So I know getting cash on hand is very as much as a high priority. So businesses that have applied for SBA loans can request emergency advances of up to $10,000. In Lubbock, small businesses obviously aren't limited to shops and restaurants. We have farmers and ranchers and all the businesses that support them that have been impacted as well. I've reached out to Ag Secretary Perdue to request financial support for the producers who are keeping Americans fed, and help secure $9.5 billion in funding for specialty crops and livestock, including dairy. For our producers who've been battling volatile markets as a result of the coronavirus, this money can hopefully provide serious support and stability. On top of that, we've replenished the Commodity Credit Corporation with $14 billion, which will help fund programs such as price loss coverage and dairy margin coverage. We're dealing, of course, with a lot of uncertainty right now, but we can't allow food shortage to be added to that list. On top of these funds that will provide immediate support for all types of small businesses, we also included changes for longer term stability. We've temporarily increased the amount of interest expense businesses can deduct in 2019 and 2020 from 30% to 50% of taxable income. This will hopefully help businesses increase liquidity with a reduced cost of capital, so they're able to continue operations and keep employees on payroll. For those who don't access the SBA loan programs, it also offers temporary refundable employer retention credit for businesses that continue to pay their employees, if that's feasible, despite shutting down or losing a significant amount of income. So as you can tell, we're trying to minimize the disruption this will have on businesses that you've worked so hard to build, and to make sure that when we come out of this crisis, once we defeat this virus, which we will, that there are jobs waiting for willing workers on the backside. Our small businesses, we know, don't need more bureaucracy. You need a lifeline, and that's what I hope that this legislation will provide. Let me just say that anytime you do anything this big and this fast, there are bound to be mistakes. And there are bound to be unintended consequences. There are bound to be gaps. And those are the sorts of things I would love to hear back from you about, because Congress intended this money to get to you as quickly as possible for the purposes that I've just described. And if there are any glitches, any impediments, any problems with that, or any gaps that need to be filled, I hope you'll communicate that to me as time permits. Many of you know Joe Rydell in my Lubbock office, and I encourage you all to reach out to him if he can ever be of assistance, and he'll be on the line for the remainder of this call so he can hear your concerns. Obviously, we have subject matter experts who've helped put this legislation together, and we are at your disposal. Once again, let me thank my friends at the Lubbock Chamber for organizing this call. I appreciate the invitation to join you. I am a novice at Zoom, but I'm learning like the rest of us. And I hope, I know you got additional speakers to get to, so let me conclude by just saying God bless you all, stay safe, and I'll turn the floor back over to Eddie.
Thank you very much, Senator, and we will continue communicating with you, and we appreciate everything that you've done for us and know that we can expect even more. So thank you again for joining us today, and we certainly do have a great communications channel with Joel, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now to our program today. At the Lubbock Chamber, we know you have many questions, and we hope most of those will be answered today. Time permitting, we will have time for a couple of questions that you have submitted at the end of today's presentation. Please use the chat group feature for your questions after Neil's presentation. Neil Bradley, the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, has spent 2 decades working directly with congressional committee chairpersons and other high-ranking policymakers to achieve solutions. At the U.S. Chamber, Neil is responsible for aligning the organization's overall policy priorities and advocacy efforts. And now I'll turn it over to Neil. And Neil, thank you again very much.
Thank you, Eddie. And it's hard to follow Senator Coryn. He has the thanks, I know, not only of everyone there in Lubbock and Texas, but really across the country for the Herculean efforts that they put in putting this legislation together. I'm going to walk through this presentation and I'll skip over parts to try not to be repetitive of what Senator Coryn said, that we can make sure we have the most time for questions here. And so if we can slide through here, go to the next slide. Here we go. As the Senator alluded to, this is a $2 trillion package, but it's actually bigger than that. You've heard folks like Larry Kudlow, the president's top economic advisor, talk about $4 trillion. How do they get that number? Because there's about $400 billion in the bill that can be used to support programs at the Federal Reserve, which they can leverage on a 10-to-1 basis to provide support in the economy. Whether you measure it as 2 trillion or 2 trillion plus 4 trillion, there's no way around it. This is a sizable effort designed to help bridge the economy and support employers and families during this time. The Senator told you about the automatic payments to individuals. These are payments based on if you've already filed your 2019 return, if not, based on your 2018 return and your income, $1,200 an individual, $2,400 filing jointly. Phases out for those joint returns at $150,000. They're looking to direct deposit these funds over the next 2 to 3 weeks in the account that you designated when you filed your tax returns. And if you didn't do that, you can go to the IRS website and they have information about what you should do as an individual taxpayer. The Senator mentioned expanded unemployment. One of the things, and we're doing quite a few of these presentations, is that we're reminding folks that as you think of unemployment traditionally and the folks who are not eligible, folks who've maybe exhausted their benefits or they're sole proprietors or independent contractors. If your unemployment, if you are furloughed, if you are unemployed, if you are laid off as a result of the coronavirus, you almost certainly now qualify for expanded unemployment benefits. The traditional unemployment benefits you would be entitled to under your state program and however they calculate that, plus an additional $600 per week through July 31st. We've had a lot of questions about folks not coming back and we made unemployment so attractive. Importantly, if your former employer, if the employer who furloughed you reopens and calls you back to work, your ability to claim unemployment insurance comes to an end. And this, of course, is all done through your state UI offices. We want to spend the bulk of our time talking about the provisions that are important for businesses. If we go to the next slide here, we can see we've broken these down into 3 groups. What are the benefits that are available to all employers? What are the ones that are specific to larger employers? And what is there for small businesses, the self-employed, independent contractors, and nonprofits? We'll spend the bulk of our time today on that last section. But let's first start with all employers. Go to the next slide. And this is one I don't believe the senator mentioned, but it's worth paying attention to. It hasn't gotten quite as much of attention. All employers have the option of delaying their employer's portion of the payroll taxes. You all know you pay your employee, then you have to write a check to Uncle Sam to cover the payroll taxes, the employee and the employer portion. Employers have the ability to defer the employer portion of those payroll taxes and then pay it 50% on December 31st, 2021, and the remainder at the end of 2022. This obviously doesn't reduce your tax liability, but it can certainly help with liquidity over the course of the next year. Importantly, there's some interaction things that we want to flag for you today. One of those interactions is if you apply for and receive the Paycheck Protection Program and have that loan forgiven, as the senator talked about, you can no longer avail yourself of the ability to defer paying payroll taxes. The senator mentioned net operating losses and interest deductibility. Those are expanded here. For folks in the retail business or restaurants, if you've improved your property over the last couple of years, you're probably all too familiar with the fact that there was a mistake in the 2017 tax bill and you haven't been able to claim all the tax benefits you're entitled to for improving that property. That's fixed in this legislation. You're going to want to talk to your accountant, your tax preparer, and make sure you take advantage of that. Let's go to the next slide. The senator began to mention the employee retention credit. This is available to all employers, but it's really focused on employers who have had to have a partial or complete shutdown because of a governmental order. So, a stay in place order or restriction put in place in your business by your local or state government officials, or you've had a 50% drop in gross receipts relative to the same quarter a year ago. If you're in one of those situations, there's a refundable tax credit for up to 50% of the wages on the first $10,000 per employee. So in short, it's a $5,000 tax credit. If you have more than 100 employees, it only applies to the extent that you are paying employees who are not providing services. So that whatever their job or occupation is, they can't continue to do the work that you would normally pay them to do. But as an employer, you continue to pay them, you can claim the credit. If you have 100 or fewer employees, it applies to all the employees you pay during that partial or complete shutdown or while you've had that drop in gross receipts. Again, an interaction here. If you receive that Paycheck Protection loan as a small business, you're not eligible for the employee retention credit. Let's go to the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about what's available for mid-size and larger employers. For these folks, there's about $500 billion provided in the bill. The vast bulk of that, $454 billion, is for the Treasury Department to support loans, loan guarantees, or to make investments in the Federal Reserve to support those credit facilities I mentioned that can be leveraged 10 to 1. There's special programs for the airline industries and certain critical national security businesses, but these are loans. With the exception of airlines, it's all on the loan side of the equation. And what they're really designed to do, particularly through the Federal Reserve, is to provide access to lending that you might not otherwise have available because of the constrictions in credit at the moment. These programs have not been established yet. We expect to have more information out of the Treasury and the Federal Reserve at the end of this week or the beginning of next week. But again, these will be programs generally run through private lenders. There are some restrictions that are likely, including that if you take a loan, a restriction on stock buybacks, dividends, and executive compensation. Now let's get to the heart of what's available for small businesses. If we go to the next slide, we're going to start with this Paycheck Protection Program. This is the $350 billion loan. I like to call it a loan/grant program that the senator mentioned. Who's eligible? Generally, small businesses with fewer than 500 employees. But if you are otherwise eligible for other SBA programs, you're likely eligible for this. If you're a 501c3 with 500 or fewer employees, you're eligible. If you are a sole proprietor, self-employed, or an independent contractor, you're usually not eligible for a lot of these programs. You're eligible for this one. How much can you borrow? You can borrow up to your average monthly payroll costs times 2.5. So 2.5 months of your average payroll expenses, not to exceed 10 million. How's this program going to be administered? The senator mentioned it's not a normal SBA program. It is not. This is a program that's intended to go through your local and national and regional based lenders. Every 7A lender is automatically approved. We've been in conversations with the banking community this morning and the Treasury Department. We expect that virtually every bank, if they choose to offer these loans, or credit union, will be designated as a lender under this program. Very minimal requirements, no collateral, no personal guarantee, and importantly, this loan converts to a grant. How does that work? From the day of origination of your loan, you go out 8 weeks and you calculate up how much you spend on payroll, rent, interest on your mortgage for your business, and utilities. And that total is available to you as a dollar for dollar forgiveness on that loan. However, that total amount can be reduced. Your loan forgiveness can be reduced if you've reduced employee headcount, or if you've cut wages and salaries to your employees by more than 25%. You begin to lose the value of that loan forgiveness. Now, we know lots of employers have already been forced to reduce their number of employees, let people go, reduce wages. If you've already done so, but you bring them back generally within the next 30 days and maintain them through June 30th, you're not dinged on your loan forgiveness. This is really designed to be a program that helps small businesses keep paying their employees over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks. Let's go to the next Oh, and by the way, here we go. The U.S. Chamber on Friday released a guide to help you walk through the things that you're going to need. The Treasury Department, about an hour and a half ago, released the initial loan application, as well as guidance for borrowers and lenders. This document that you can find at uschamber.com/SB loans is being updated as we speak with that information. Loans will become available beginning on Friday. And so if this is something you're interested in, you're going to want to start gathering that information now. And this is a good place you can start to find out what you're going to need when you go see your lender. Let's talk about one of the other programs that's available. This is the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loans. I'm from Oklahoma, so I'm familiar with the natural disasters that can occur in our part of the country, tornadoes and the like. If you've been through that, you're familiar with the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Program. This is the normal program a business can apply for. Congress has loosened some of the requirements here. For example, loans can now be based on your credit score with no tax return required. You can get up to $200,000 without a personal guarantee, no collateral required on a $25,000 loan or less, and they're being a little more generous with respect to what you have to pledge as collateral for larger loans, general security interest rather than real estate. Importantly, there's a new $10,000 emergency grant that if you apply for an EIDL loan, that's what these are called, you can say, I'm requesting an emergency grant. You're supposed to receive that within 3 days. That does not have to be repaid, except if you get a paycheck protection loan, they'll offset this loan forgiveness for that loan forgiveness up to $10,000. You can apply for this today through SBA.gov. I was just on there a little bit ago. They've done a nice job simplifying for the government the application process. Let's go to the next aspect of it. These are two elements, paid sick leave and paid family leave, that aren't in the Phase 3 bill. It's the bill that came law about a week before, but these provisions are now taking effect, and it's a requirement for employers with fewer than 500 employees to provide up to 10 days of paid sick leave related to COVID-19. So an individual who's ill, quarantined, has to take care of a family member or take care of a child because their school or daycare is closed. If you're taking care of yourself because you're sick or quarantined, it's your regular rate of pay with a maximum of 511. If you're taking care of someone else, it's 2/3 of your rate of pay, maximum of $200. We're used to Congress doing unfunded mandates. In this instance, it's a funded mandate. Employers will be reimbursed up to 100% of the maximum amount. So whatever you pay up to the maximum, you get reimbursed by the federal government. There's been a lot of questions about employers with fewer than 50, and can you be exempt from it? The short answer is yes, but the only provisions you can be exempt from are providing leave for an employee who's taking care of a child, and only if providing that leave threatens the viability of the business. And if we go to the last slide, you'll see that there's essentially the same requirements, but in this case, it's for 10 weeks of FMLA, family medical leave, for an employee to take care of a child whose school is closed. Again, 2/3 regular rate, $200, fully reimbursed. Again, if you have fewer than 50 employees and it threatens the viability of the business, you can be exempt from this requirement. And if your employee can telework, it's not available. So I know that was a lot to throw at you. Eddie has his slide deck. We'll make it available. If you need more information, you can go to the uschamber.com. I know the Lubbock Chamber has lots of information on their website that they're also making available. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Eddie, and we'll be happy to take your questions or guidance.
Neil, thank you again. That was an excellent presentation, and I think the amount of information that you were able to condense shows a couple of things. One, that you were awful involved in the process to begin with, as well as you can understand this so well to explain it to even someone like I can understand. And we know it's a certainly unprecedented time we're living in, but again, like I said earlier, the U.S. Chamber has been so so instrumental in the work that y'all have given us that I really appreciate that we have a chance to and proud to be able to partner with y'all. If you don't mind sticking around, we have a couple of questions, and I think Norma's going to help you with those questions. Norma?
Glad to do that, Eddie. Thank you so much, Neil. We appreciate that. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
So the first question that I have is from someone that wants to know, will an apartment company that has individual sites be able to get an SBA loan by location, or just the management company have one loan? They're saying hotels and restaurants seem to be by location, so does the same stand for apartment?
Great question. And so normally when you are applying for SBA loan and you're calculating your employee head count, you have to do it by the enterprise. You can't say that each location is a separate business and therefore break up your employees to avail yourself of it. They created an exception in this bill just for the Paycheck Protection Program, but just for businesses that fall under what's called NAICS Category 72. That's folks who are in the accommodation business and the food service. That includes, hotels, motels, restaurants. It does not include rental properties or apartment buildings. So the questioner is exactly right. If you're in the hotel business, you can do it on a per location basis. If you're in the apartment building business, you cannot. And it's the normal affiliation aggregation rules that apply to you.
Okay, I have another question about people that, an employer that has subcontractors. Will the compensation for subcontractors be able to be included into the payroll for the Paycheck Protection Plan application?
So this was a point that there was a lot of confusion on, and the guidance that we put out was that the way we read the statute, that you apply for as an employer, you could apply based on the payroll you paid your employees, not on what you paid contractors, but that contractors could apply themselves, even as a sole proprietor, independent contractor. Admittedly, the language in the legislation was, as the senator said, they were working fast and it could have been clearer. The guidance that the Treasury Department released, as I said, a couple hours ago, adopts that view that the employer applies for the wages, health benefits, paid sick leave, et cetera, that they pay their employees. And it's the independent contractor who applies for their own wages based on whatever they get from working for you, and also combining that working for someone else, et cetera.
Okay, we have a yes or no question basically in that what qualifies for the 2 weeks paid time off? Does an employee or family member have to have a positive COVID-19 test to qualify?
I don't know for certain. I can tell you, I think the way they designed it was that that was not the case. So, for example, if your physician tells you, we've all had this, we have an employee who is gone, who's gotten the test, who doesn't have the results, and they're told to self-quarantine, their test may or may not be positive. They are self-quarantined at the moment, so they're available for sick leave. I think the question would be, what happens at the end if the test comes back? Then you may have an issue where you probably can bring the employee back. A great resource on this is the Department of Labor's website. They have a Q&A that's running over 50 questions long that gets really into some of those details. But if a doctor has told someone you need to stay at home right now, they're entitled to the sick leave. That's certainly the way they've intended it.
And I would note that we have that Q&A linked at our resource page, and we ran it on our social media yesterday as well. I think it was up to question number 59.
They keep adding.
We have a question from an essential healthcare provider that wants to know if the leave, the employee leave, if there are some employees that are critical of to the operation that can be opted out of that. Or
yes,
is it across the board?
There's a specific provision with regard to essential healthcare providers and first responders, and you have the ability not just to exempt out personnel, but as an entity to the extent that you're an essential healthcare entity. And you're going to want to check that definition on that Q&A site to make sure it matches up. Don't just assume you are, but if it matches up where those requirements don't apply to you.
Okay. When does the 8-week period start for the Paycheck Protection Program?
In the statute, it says on the origination of the loan.
And just to confirm that the payroll related relief for those having to quarantine in terms of the paid leave, that takes effect tomorrow. Is that right?
I'm just looking at my calendar and all the days are in together. Yes, tomorrow's the 1st. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so if that's the case, does that mean that any losses of employee time due to those reasons prior to tomorrow are exempt from that particular legislation?
I believe that's the case. So this is, remember, this is a mandate that takes effect on you and then you get reimbursed for it. Yeah.
Okay, and then how does a company's current sick leave policy dovetail with the Family First Act policies?
So this is in addition to whatever are including whatever's required because of a state or local ordinance. And so this is in addition to, not in lieu of, and you can't force your employee to take to take your paid leave in lieu of the federal reimbursed or vice versa.
Okay, and can you sort of looking forward a little bit from a phase 4 potential legislation standpoint, what would you look and see in your crystal ball on that?
You know, there's lots of conversations from everything from a major infrastructure bill, which the president and Speaker Pelosi both talked about, to Speaker Pelosi wanting to reverse provisions on state and local tax deductibility. I think the truth is that Congress isn't going to be back here, barring something unforeseen, for 3 to 4 weeks. And think about how much this has changed in the past week. It's going to change even more. I'll tell you, at the U.S. Chamber, what we're beginning to zero around on is, as the senator began with, any gaps that we can identify that were missed. There are definitely gaps with respect to nonprofits who are not 501c3s, for example. Those need to be fixed in the next piece of legislation. There are other employers who we're finding who are kind of caught in a gap depending on how they're organized. We're suggesting that could be fixed. And then from there, it's what do we do based on the trajectory of the pandemic. For example, there's a lot of conversations about phased reopenings so that we begin to come back, but it's not like a light switch. So one of the things we're thinking about is what if you're allowing things to reopen, but you have social distancing orders and you have a movie theater? Does that mean you're filling every other seat or every third seat? You're reopened, but probably hard to pay the bills on every third seat. And so that's clearly, we're going to have to think about some things to help businesses through whatever that trajectory is that we end up adopting for the reopening. Our advice is that those needs, those very targeted practical needs should drive what's done.
Okay. We have a question from someone in the healthcare industry that says that they had an employee that flew to Florida over spring break, just as this was breaking wide open. And so the governing body over their profession said that anyone that had been on a plane needed to quarantine for 2 weeks. As an employer, do you know the employee was sent home? So as an employer, because this is before April 1st, and this was a part-time employee, are they obligated to pay for the 2 weeks as though they'd been working?
I think you'd want to refer to that Q&A and figure out particularly if it's lapping over. So we're clearly going to have some instances where today you might not have a requirement, tomorrow you do, and you got to figure out how to take advantage of that. It is, if you are part-time, your sick leave benefit is based on your normal hours, not full-time. And so you're going to want to figure that out if you have someone who's kind of bridging this date divide here.
Neil, is there any type of reimbursement provision or any type of help for essential care providers that have seen an extreme increase in supplies expenses?
There's quite a bit of funding for the health sector for hospitals and others that the senator mentioned. I don't know how I think it would depend on how are you normally reimbursed by government. If you are, there may be some things there. Beyond that, I don't know.
Okay. And then there's a question about the $100,000 annual salary exemption on the PPP, I'm assuming. Does that include bonuses, or do you know?
So wages take into consideration all those forms of compensation. Okay. And remember, it's not that if you're at 101,000, you can't count anything. It's that you're at 101,000, you can count the 100,000 prorated out over the course of the year. You can't count the 1,000. So this is not if you're above, you get nothing. This is a situation in which you just can't include those costs above 100,000 towards your payroll costs.
Okay. And if there is a phase 4, do you see any type of extension in terms of the extended family leave portion of this? For instance, the closure time for schools in terms of virtual education was just extended in Texas today. So do you see anything going forward in terms of helping to address that?
I suspect that will be a topic of conversation. If you think about a week ago, we thought things would be closed for 2 weeks or so. Now, in many parts of the country, they've basically canceled the rest of the school year.
Okay. And then in terms of timing from a phase 4 standpoint, are we looking at after Congress is back, and what's the timing of that?
So congressional staff are telling us they're already starting to draft, and they'll really be drafting in earnest next week. But again, I think barring anything unforeseen that would require Congress to reconvene, this is really an issue for when members return. Speaker Pelosi, for whatever it's worth, I think told her leadership team today that when they return, she's hoping to pass a phase 4 bill that first week back.
Okay. And then from a timing standpoint on the SBA loan payroll calculation, if can employees that were hired before December 31st, who started before the February lock-in date, can that go into the average wage calculation, or do you know that information?
On its face, there's nothing in the statute that would provide for that. If you were in business all of 2019, they've released kind of minimal guidance today Those are the kind of things that, as we talked about the Department of Labor going from 10 questions to 50 to 59, those are the things as they continue to flesh out, I think they'll be further. But at the moment, absent some guidance, I think the answer to that is no.
Okay. And then we have a question about calculating whether it would be more beneficial for employees to make more filing for unemployment rather than the Paycheck Protection Program. And is that just something that needs to be weighed and calculated by employers?
You would certainly want to weigh and calculate that. I mean, Congress's intention, I think it's fair to say, with, for example, the Paycheck Protection Program, is to enable businesses to continue to pay their employees. And so, the theory is this is supposed to help them be able to do that. And the guy said it's better to keep your employees kind of attached to the business. But, obviously everyone will have to make their own calculations.
From an S Corp standpoint, Neil, is there any specific information that should be covered, such as wage calculations or how the K-2s figure into that? Anything that you would like to throw out? We've had some questions from various members that are filed as S Corps.
Yeah, I believe there's at least some initial information on this. This is one of those things where we're looking for guidance for, and I believe there's some initial information with respect to S Corps, certainly with respect to partnerships and how they're treated and what you have to do in the guidance that Treasury just released.
Okay. And I know that Eddie was also monitoring some questions, or that he had visited with some members and maybe had other questions as well. So I'm going to toss it to him right quick and see if there's anything that he's got.
And thank you very much, Norma. I think you handled those questions well, and thank you to all the attendees who posed those questions. Neil, one of the things that we're going to be starting to do here locally is to gather up all the non-501c3s and survey them on what their knowledge level is as far as the fact that C6s were omitted from phase 3 and what we can do to help this. And while we've been here, I've been talking to some of my WACE comrades in the Western United States who are also developing the same line of questioning. Would you go ahead and explain real quick to make sure that everybody understands? And you explained earlier about 501c3s being in the PPP, but would you explain what happened to where we need to go forward, I guess, is the best question.
Sure. While 501cs are the most common form of a nonprofit organization, they're not the only form. And so, for example, chambers of commerce are generally organized as 501c6s. You can have labor and employee groups that are organized, I believe it's under either C5 or C4. You can have community groups that are organized under C4. You can have fraternal organizations that are organized under another C section. None of those organizations are eligible for the PPP program. We crunched some numbers this morning. By our estimates, there's 1.3 million Americans who work for a nonprofit that is not a C3, that is either a C4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. And those employers have they don't have access to any of the benefits under this bill.
Thank you, and I know that you're working awfully hard on our regard in that respect, and thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll hear more on that from our friends as well. So, Neil, I got to tell you that I've asked everybody if there's any other questions, and I haven't heard anything, but want to be respectful of both their time for what they have to do today as well as yours. And I want to remind everybody we are continually updating the information that what you've presented today, as well as our resource section on our information resources page of our website at lubbockchamber.com. And I can't really give you a proper round of applause while everybody else is muted, but we certainly appreciate your time and efforts today, Neil. I think the information you provided was outstanding. So please, on behalf of the folks who are attending in the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce overall and my board of directors. Neil, thank you very much for your time today, and we will stay in touch, and please pass our best to all the folks back at the U.S. Chamber and tell them how much we appreciated them making you available today.
Well, thank you, Eddie, and thanks everyone for joining us. And we look forward to working together to get through all of this. So thank you.
Yes, sir. And it was a treat to have Senator Coryn kind of take away some of your thunder, but I thought that was kind of cool. So
I love it. I love it. You know, he helped put it together. He deserves the credit. You know, if we're going to get through this, it's because of what they put together. I figure our job is just to go out and evangelize so people know what to take advantage of.
Well, Neil, thank you again. We wish you the best, and please stay safe and secure in our nation's capital. Thank you. Thank all of y'all.